You are listening to continuing coverage of the trial of Chad Daybell from True Crime Today and the Hidden Killers podcast. Let's go back to the courtroom.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Your Honor, before we go on the record, can we approach?
Yes.
Sure.
Bailiff, we could have the jury file.
Yes, no.
You can be seated.
All rise. All the jury is present and accounted for.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Bailiff. Please be seated. All right. Good morning, everyone. We're back on the record on case CR 22-21-1623, State of Idaho versus Chad Daybell. This is the second day of introduction of evidence in the state's case in chief. Although the state is here and present, Mr. Wood was conducting examination of a witness. Mr. Wood, is the state ready to proceed this morning?
Yes, Your Honor.
Very well. Also note the defense is present, along with counsel and the defendant. The court also notes the jurors are all properly seated and all 18 jurors have returned. The court's also confirmed that the jurors each completed their affirmation this morning regarding not looking into the case during the break. And so we appreciate you following that admonishment as well. One other matter I just wanted to bring up before we got started with additional evidence is the court's live streaming this hearing and this trial. I heard there were some complaints that the audio maybe wasn't coming through very well on that. I'd asked the attorneys if they could to talk right into the mics. Of course, that helps as well with our court reporter making the record. In addition, the live stream comes directly through the court's official channel. That can be somewhat difficult to find if you go to the Idaho Supreme Court website. However, there is a website on Ada County about this trial, and if you just Google the term Ada County Daybell trial, there's an easy link to find for the court's official live stream, and that's the most direct signal. So for those that are observing the trial online, if you're having any issues with audio or quality of the signal, perhaps you could go to that direct signal, which is the best source of the live stream proceeding. So with that, then we had Detective Hermosillo was on the stand yesterday, and I believe you're continuing direct examination. Is that correct, Mr. Wood?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, I'll have the witness recalled then if you're ready to proceed with additional testimony.
Thank you.
All right, Detective Hermosillo was sworn in yesterday. I'll remind you, you are still under oath for your testimony today. And to confirm, not being the state's case agent, I just want to confirm that you didn't review any, well, you're the first witness, so we don't need to do that on this particular witness. So, Mr. Wood, if you'd like to just inquire on further direct, you can do that this time.
All right, thank you. Good morning, Detective. Good morning. Second, when we finished off yesterday, we were discussing what you had found or what you had observed at a burial site, and just for purposes of the jury, what site were you at when you found the body you were speaking of yesterday?
We were at the site that we deemed JJ's burial site.
And where, Your Honor, if I could be given State's Exhibit 10A, if I may publish that?
Yes, it's admitted, correct?
Yes.
Very well.
Detective, if you could, just for purposes of clarification with a pointer, point out the location you were speaking of.
It's the burial site on the other side of this pond, just underneath this tree.
Okay. Now, you call it a pond. When you were out there on June 9th, was there water in it?
No, there wasn't.
Okay. And again, just to clarify, when we had left off your testimony yesterday, is it correct that what you observed was what appeared to be a small body wrapped up in a black plastic bag?
That's correct.
Your Honor, I'd ask that the witness be handed State's Exhibits 10B through 10M. Detective, can you review those exhibits and let me know when you got a chance to? Detective, do you recognize state's exhibits 10B through 10M?
Yes.
What do they purport to be?
Photographs, there's a photograph of the west side of the defendant Daybell's residence. And photographs of the backyard.
And do you know when these photographs were taken?
On June 9th, 2020.
Were you the photographer?
No,
But you were on the property that day.
that's correct.
And were you able to observe each of the areas that are photographed in these exhibits?
Yes,
You saw them with your own eyes.
yes,
And are these true and accurate representations of what you observed on June 9th, 2020?
yes.
Your Honor, I move for admission of state's exhibits 10B through 10M.
Any objection?
Judge, just to,
Into the microphone, please, Mr. Pryor.
I'm sorry, Judge. Judge, just one here on 10B if I could. Otherwise, I'm fine with the rest of the exhibits.
Okay, so let's do that then. So 10C through 10M have been offered and are admitted, and Mr. Pryor, you can board there on 10B.
And officer, you're looking at 10B, is that right?
Yes,
For now.
yes,
And the vehicle that's parked in 10B, is that the vehicle that was the position of the vehicle at the time that you testified about Mr. Daybell?
that's not the vehicle that Mr. Daybell was in. That one.
Okay, do you know what vehicle that is?
And the driveway looks like a Subaru.
Okay, is that the driveway that you're making reference to?
That's correct.
So in other words, somebody else's vehicle is there. We don't know whose vehicle that is,
It's not the one that Mr. Daybell was in, no.
but you don't know whose vehicle that is.
I don't know whose vehicle that is.
You don't know when the vehicle was put there.
No, sir.
You don't know who the owner of the vehicle is.
That's correct.
Okay, I would object, Judge, on foundation.
All right, Mr. Wood.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective, so you don't know whose vehicle that is, correct?
Correct.
But you were still there that day. Okay, do you recognize this as Mr. Daybell's residence?
Yes, I do.
And this is a true and accurate representation of Mr. Daybell's residence?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, I think significant or sufficient foundation has been laid.
All right,
Judge, I just make a record that I'm objecting also on the basis of relevance. It looks like it's a picture of a vehicle in the driveway.
okay. Well, the picture shows many things, including a vehicle. I'll allow the state to have this admitted, and sufficient foundation's been established, so 10B is admitted as well as the others.
Thank you. Detective, if you will, pardon, Your Honor, may I publish?
Yes.
Detective, what did you observe in State's Exhibit 10B?
That is the west side of the Daybell residence. When I testified earlier to coming out and standing in the lawn area, that's not the vehicle that Mr. Daybell was in, but it was similarly parked that way, backed in. And that's the driveway he was sitting in when I was observing him look over his right shoulder toward the pond area.
Detective, do you have the pointer with you? Can you point to where you were standing when you initially observed Mr. Daybell's behavior?
I was standing here in this area.
And then you said that you positioned yourself so that you could see what you thought he was looking at.
That's correct.
And where did you go then?
I stood more towards the driveway area. The vehicle that Mr. Daybell was in was up further this way. It wasn't backed in as far as this vehicle in the photograph.
And just to clarify, is that when you looked back and saw the activity under what became the first burial site?
Well, I was looking forward at that time. I was facing this direction. And I aligned myself with Mr. Daybell, who was up here more, and he was looking towards this area here.
Okay. Now, can you see the first burial site from where you're from that location?
Yes, it's the tree I spoke about earlier. This is the tree where JJ was buried underneath. This right here is the pond. You can see just a little bit more taller shrubs around the top of the pond area. But this is the tree that JJ was buried underneath.
So is it fair to say that even from the front or the middle of Mr. Daybell's front yard, you can see that location easily.
That's correct.
Detective, what did you observe in State's Exhibit C, 10C?
Well, when I testified, I was tasked with sifting through the fire pit. This is what we deemed the fire pit. It had burnt tree limbs. There was various little pieces of trash. It was in the middle of round cinder blocks. So that's what we deemed the fire pit as.
And the way it appears in that image, that's the way you found it that day.
Correct. It was that morning, yes.
And what do you observe in State's Exhibit 10D?
This is just north of the driveway that Mr. Daybell was sitting in, looking in the same direction. So we're standing on the west side looking east. And that is the tree. And then here's the pond area right here.
Jacob, I'm going to put up State's Exhibit 10A again. And if you can point to the approximate location of where this picture was taken from.
So that last photograph was taken from this area right here.
And so it's fair to say from that location, you can easily see burial site number 1.
Judge, I'm going to object at this point. There's been some leading questions. Continues.
I'll sustain that last question is leading.
Right. From that perspective, what were you able to observe?
Burial site number 1, JJ's burial site.
Was it difficult for you to observe it from that location?
The actual grave site on the ground, yes, from that location, but where the tree and the pond are, no, it wasn't difficult.
Detective, what did you observe in State's Exhibit 10E?
So when I testified earlier about the difference in length of grass and shrubs in that 6x6 section that was marked off next to the pond, this is what I'm referring to. If you look close, you can see there's smaller grass and dirt protruding right here. This is probably a little bit difficult to see. There's probably a better photograph. But this is longer shrubs through here, and then in here was like the length of sod and some dirt where there was nothing growing.
And when yesterday you testified being called over to burial site 1, is that what it looked like when you got over there?
That's correct.
Detective, can you describe to the jury what you saw in State's Exhibit 10F?
So when I spoke about ERT removing the topsoil and the top level of shrubs, this is what I was speaking about. And you can start to see the 3 large white rocks I was talking about earlier starting to come through the dirt.
You testified yesterday about a smell. Was this the same time that you began to smell what you described yesterday?
Yes, as soon as they removed this and the topsoil, that's when I instantly can smell the smell of a decomposing body.
Detective, can you tell the jury what you saw in State's Exhibit 10? Or I'm sorry, 10G.
So as the ERT team methodically removed the soil around the white rocks and dug down just a little bit deeper, this is what we saw. You can start to see there was a smaller rock, but the 3 large white rocks started to show through clearly. When I testified that there was thin wood paneling underneath the white rocks, you can start to see the edge of that piece of wood paneling underneath the rocks. We also noticed that there were roots cut that the ERT team didn't cut. They were already pre-cut. And some of the roots are fairly thick, so that was something we observed as well in that burial site.
Detective, can you describe for the jury what you saw in States Exhibit 10H.
After the ERT team removed the white rocks, this is the two pieces of wood paneling that were underneath.
What did you observe in States Exhibit 10I?
I spoke earlier about the distinction in soil. Some of the soil looked wet or moist, some of it looked dry. Excuse me. What you're looking at here is once we remove the wood paneling, this is what was underneath, and you can start to see the distinction through here of the wet soil. And up here is just the dry soil. So the rocks and the paneling were all through here. So that was the other thing that we observed. And as we took the paneling off, the odor began to become a lot stronger. So we knew we were at the right spot.
Your Honor, I apologize for any delay. I wonder if we could just have a very brief sidebar regarding the removal. All right.
Stuart, you can continue.
Thank you. Detective, can you explain to the jury what you observed in States Exhibit 10J?
So once we started removing the wet soil, and I testified earlier to a black round object protruding through the dirt, this is what we started to see. It appeared to be like tight wrapped black plastic. It wasn't very too far underneath. It's fairly shallow, but that's what we started to see. And I talked about what appeared to be the crown of a human head.
Can you describe what you saw in States Exhibit 10K?
So once that appeared, the ERT team leader, Steve Daniels, used a small, sharp instrument. And I testified that he made a slit through the black plastic. And you can see the black plastic kind of peeled away on the top of the head. And then I testified there was a white piece of plastic underneath. And this is the white piece of plastic here. He made a slit in the white plastic. And when he did that, you can see what appeared to be brown human hair. Some of the hair kind of came out with the sharp instrument, and that's the hair you can see on top of the white plastic. But that's what you're looking at there.
Can you tell the jury what you observed in States Exhibit 10L?
Once the ERT team continued excavating, they removed all the soil on top of this small body that was wrapped in completely black plastic. I testified that it appeared to take the shape of the small body in black plastic. And this is what we saw here. It's probably a 4x2 grave, and I'm guessing at those measurements. But it started to take the shape of a small body, and then it had different pieces of duct tape throughout the black plastic on top.
What did you observe in States Exhibit 10M?
Once we lifted JJ out of the ground, there was still wet soil underneath where he was laying. And that's body decomposition. The body had begun to break down. So that's what the wet soil is through here. Again, you can see the roots that were cut to be able to put him in this location.
Detective, once that body was recovered, what did you do? Oh, and to clarify that question, once that body was taken out of the ground, what did you do?
I assisted the coroner and a few other officers in placing JJ in a body bag, black body bag. The coroner locked the body bag for evidence. We then put it in the back of the coroner's vehicle. The coroner and a Fremont County deputy drove the vehicle up to the morgue, and myself and Lieutenant Rockwell followed behind that vehicle. Once we were at the morgue, JJ was placed in the morgue, and then we returned back to the Daybell residence.
Do you recall who the Fremont County coroner was?
Brenda died.
And do you recall what other officers traveled with you to the hospital?
In my vehicle was just Lieutenant Ron Ball. With the coroner, Brenda Dye, I believe it was Detective Kaiserman.
And just for clarification, you had said this already, I apologize, but what hospital did you take them to?
Madison Memorial Hospital
And where is that located?
in the city of Rexburg.
Once you finished that task, what was the next step for your investigation?
We returned back to the Daybell residence. As we got there, we were told that they had possibly
Judge, I'm going to object at this point. There's some hearsay.
I'll ask another question. Without telling the jury what anyone told you, what did you do when you got back to the residence?
we assisted in a second burial site.
And when you got back to the residence, did you observe another burial site being looked at?
I did.
Where was that located?
So through the course of our investigation, we learned that the Daybell family had deemed a section of the backyard as what they referred to as a pet cemetery. And we knew through talking to family members that the pet cemetery had a little black dog statue next to a post that kind of signified where the pet cemetery was. And so when I returned back from dropping JJ off at the morgue, I observed ERT digging in the pet cemetery area.
And did you aid in that excavation?
I did.
What did you personally do?
ERT began taking off top layers of soil in this specific area in the pet cemetery. Once they began to again see wet soil start to protrude through the dry soil, they slowed down, and we got on our hands and knees and began excavating that by hand.
And by hand, did you use tools to do that?
We did. They had small tools that we could use, trowels, like paintbrushes, things of that nature.
Approximately what time of day was this?
Say it was afternoon.
And approximately how many people were there with you using hand tools?
There was only a few of us at a time that could work because of the area, but also because of the smell. We had to take turns digging because we were on our hands and knees, and the smell was so bad that you could only work for a few minutes before somebody else had to take turns, get on their hands and knees and start digging by hand.
And you said the smell, what did it smell like?
Decomposing body.
How long did you aid in that excavation using the hand tools?
Hours, probably hours.
And did you find anything?
We did. We ended up digging down and started to uncover burnt pieces of flesh, charred bone, fatty tissue, just, and I apologize for the lack of better words, but globs of burnt flesh starting to protrude through the dirt.
And once you found that, how long did you keep working that site that day?
We worked probably until probably 4-ish in the afternoon.
And you mentioned ERT. Were they working there alongside you?
They were. There was also other areas being excavated as well, the fire pit still. So everybody was kind of tasked with something different at that point. And once we started getting down a little bit more in Tylee's burial site, we assumed it was Tylee, we could start to see the top of what appeared to be something plastic and green. And at that point, the ERT team leader, Steve Daniels, decided we were done for the evening.
When you were done for the evening, what happened?
We had Fremont County Sheriff's Office, the Madison County Fire Department, bring in 2 large light trucks to illuminate the crime scene. The crime scene was taped off. We had officers from Rexburg City Police, deputies from Fremont County Sheriff's Office that remained on scene all night long, walking the perimeter to make sure that the scene wasn't compromised. And it was well illuminated.
And did you return the next day?
Yes, we did.
And when you returned the next day, who else returned?
Everybody that was there the previous day.
So ERT came back,
That's correct, yes.
and other members of the FBI,
Yes,
Fremont County officers,
yes.
Rexburg police officers.
Correct.
And I believe you testified earlier that there were some Attorney General investigators there as well.
Yes,
And they were all there that second day.
that's correct.
Approximately what time did you arrive that second day?
We started fairly early. It was approximately 7 in the morning.
And what did you start doing when you got there on the second day?
I went back to Tylee's burial site. We had put up canopies to keep sunlight and wind. There was media, helicopters flying overhead, so we wanted to keep the scene from being compromised as much as we possibly could. And at that point, we got back down on our hands and knees and began digging again with those same little tools to get down to see what exactly we were going to take out of the ground at that point.
And so and then what happened next? Did you continue to do that work?
Like I said, we would take turns digging because the smell was so bad. And we would just keep excavating slowly around this green object that started to come through the dirt the first day. So it started to take a shape, a roundish shape, when we began digging down and methodically removing dirt. And at that point, we could start to see what appeared to be the shape of a green melted bucket that appeared to have the remains of, we assume, were Tylee that were charred and burned inside it.
And were you there for the excavation of that bucket?
Yes.
How did that happen?
Once we got down to what we thought was the bottom of the disformed bucket, we observed part of a human skull underneath the bucket. There was some teeth that we ended up excavating from underneath. At that point, the goal was to lift that out of the ground. And so there was we made kind of a little hole around it to try to get underneath. So we put tarps out. Like I said, the goal was to try to lift it completely out without manipulating it in any way. But when we tried to do that, when we lifted it, it all broke apart because there was nothing holding it together. So at that point, we had to go back in and remove all the pieces of the charred flesh and burnt bone and organs and pieces of Tylee at that point, put onto the tarp.
And while you were doing that, you talked about the smell on you. Was that still present?
Yes, very much so. Strong odor, yes.
Were you able to observe the lack of a better word, total removal of that green bucket and its contents from that excavation site?
We were able to lift everything out at that point. We put it on the blue tarp. There were photographs taken, measurements taken by ERT. Once that was completed, we dug down even further to make sure we didn't miss anything. Once we figured out everything was out of the ground, that tarp and those and Tylee's remains were then put into a body bag in the corner, again, lock the body bag for evidence purposes. And Tylee was also transported to the morgue.
And did you follow along when Tylee was transferred to the morgue like you did with JJ?
We did. We followed in the same manner. Myself and Lieutenant Ball. Once Tylee was placed in the morgue, we returned back to the Daybell residence.
Your Honor, I'm going to be asked that the witness be handed State's Exhibits 11A through 11G.
And Judge, for the record, I've previously reviewed these and I would object to admission of these as exhibits.
All right, exhibits 11A through 11G are admitted without objection.
Yep.
This time, as we get into this evidence, I'm going to announce that because of the graphic nature of some of this evidence, I'm not going to be showing this on the court's live stream, nor to the general public in the courtroom. The jurors will be viewing the evidence as well as the parties are permitted to see that. In addition, the court will provide an opportunity for any victims that wish to see the evidence in a private setting to review it as it's now been admitted into the record. We made arrangements to not display this to the general public. And so, Mr. Wood, with these exhibits, that's how we'll proceed. And we will not include that on the live stream, but you can discuss it on the record in open public with the witness.
Captain, can you review that exhibit, those exhibits? And Your Honor, I understand these are already admitted. I am still ask a few foundational questions just to establish knowledge.
Very well.
For the record. Detective, what does State's Exhibit 11 report to be? And its subparts?
Photograph of the pet cemetery and photographs of Tylee as we took her out of the ground in her burial site.
And were these photographs taken on June 9 and 10?
That's correct, yes.
And were you on the scene that day when those photographs were taken?
Yes,
And are they true and accurate representations of what you saw?
yes.
Your Honor, those exhibits having been admitted, I'd ask to publish the jury. Detective, before I publish that, I'm going to place State's Exhibit 10A up again. And can you point to the general location of what you've described as the pet cemetery?
Right here.
So can you have on the record and explain where it's pointing?
Yes, yeah, Detective, will you explain where you're pointing?
It's just east of this shop area and just north of the fire pit. So it's right through here.
And Your Honor, I do think that the state's first picture under State's Exhibit 11 is okay for public consumption.
It is. I just wanted to make sure our system was working as well, that Exhibit 11A is fine.
Detective, what did you observe in State's Exhibit 11A?
This is where we began excavating briefly. As you can see in this photograph, there's a small black dog statue next to the post. So that's where we had learned this was the pet cemetery area through talking to family members. And then there's just some tarps laid out for some of the soil. You can see in the back the markers that had been distinguished and laid out by ERT for the fire pit area that I had talked about earlier.
And Your Honor, I think at this point it's appropriate to turn to public access.
I agree.
Detective, Your Honor, I'm at a bit of a, I have no idea if this is, I can't see if this, well, I'll ask, Detective, can you see that image in your monitor?
Yes,
Can you see most of it?
yes.
Can you describe for the jury what's been marked as State's Exhibit 11B? What did you observe there?
Can I see? Is there a way I can use the pointer?
I have a suggestion also, Mr. Wood, just because I understand what you're doing to try to line that up since you can't see the monitor. Do you want to set a notepad or something on there and get it oriented, and you could set on top of that just so that it's lined up?
And if I could have the screen for 1 moment, thank you. You remember that suggestion? Detective, what did you observe in State's Exhibit 11B?
It's hard to describe that pointer, but I'll do my best. In the middle of that photograph, you can start to see the different color and the changes in the soil from dry to a wet, moist dirt. You can start to see to the left just a little bit of that area. You can see the white piece sticking out and it's burnt on top, and that's charred bone that's starting to stick out, and all the little pieces next to it are pieces of burnt flesh, tissue, what we later determined were organs that were all kind of, that's the top of what was inside the bucket. So that's what we first started to see when we started to excavate.
And at this point, were you still using the hand tools?
Yes.
Can you explain for the jury what you observed in State's Exhibit 11C?
So as we started to excavate down further, some of the top of the mass of burnt flesh wasn't really attached to anything. And so when we would start to dig away towards the sides, it would kind of come apart. It wasn't part of that original mass. And so what you're looking at on this blue tarp is burnt flesh still attached to some bone. The upper left part of that section that you're looking at is part of the hip bone, but it still has burnt flesh attached to it, and then dirt and just fatty burnt tissue.
You described the jury, what you observed in State's Exhibit 11D.
So when I talked about it started to take a roundish shape, this is what I'm referring to. And we dug around the sides of it, trying to get to the bottom, because like I said, the goal was to get underneath, have 3 or 4 guys in there and just lift it onto the tarp. So that's what you're looking at in this photograph, is just the burnt flesh that's still just kind of inside that hook.
And Judge, could we approach for a sidebar, please?
Yes.
And that's part of a human skull just to the right of that, the green bucket. There were teeth there in the dirt as well. But that's what you're looking at, it's just a close-up of the bottom of it.
Detective, what can you explain for the jury what you observed in State's Exhibit 11F?
So once we removed that mass and put it on the blue tarp, there was still some wet soil underneath. So we dug down even further to make sure that we had excavated everything we needed. And so what you're looking at, you can see the tarps in the background we had put up. You can see some of the hand tools that we used just to the right of that hole. But that's what you're looking at, is just after we got that mass out, the wet soil.
Detective, what did you observe in State's Exhibit 11G?
So these were part of Tylee that kind of broke apart when we tried to lift it out of the ground. There's pieces of charred bone. There's parts of a skull on the bottom left, covered in dirt, and there's still burnt, rotting flesh still attached to the bone. So that's what you're looking at that one. These were the pieces that broke off.
Detective, I believe you testified that you assisted in transferring those remains to Madison County, to the hospital, correct?
Correct, I followed behind the corner.
Was Lieutenant Ball with you again?
He was.
Once you got up to the hospital, what did you do?
We observed the Fremont County coroner, Brenda Dye, transfer Tylee's remains into the morgue. The morgue was unlocked, but there was evidence they put up. And at that point, myself and Lieutenant Ball went back to the defendant Daybell's residence.
And what did you do when you got back there?
We assisted and made sure there were no other burial sites or anything that the ERT team needed assistance with. At that point, we decided that we were going to take JJ and Tylee to the Ada County Coroner's Office to have an autopsy performed. So roughly 4 p.m. on June 10th, 2020, it was decided that we were going to follow the county coroner with the remains of JJ and Tylee to the 80 County Coroner's Office for an autopsy the next morning.
And when did you arrive in Ada County, approximately?
Approximately 8 or 9 in the evening on June 10th.
And what did you do once you got there?
We went directly to the coroner's office, and JJ and Tylee were dropped off, and the coroner's office took custody of both JJ and Tylee.
So that was later in the evening.
Correct.
And was an autopsy performed that night?
No.
When was the autopsy?
Yeah,
Judge, I'm going to object. There needs to be some foundation.
Overruled, if you know, you may answer.
the autopsy was performed June 11th, early morning hours.
Well, that was the next day.
Correct.
And were you present for that?
Yes, I was.
And where did that autopsy take place?
At the Ada County Coroner's Office.
So when you arrived at the coroner's office, what did you do first?
Initially, when we arrived, we had a little debrief with the medical examiner, Garth Warren. He told us what he expected.
Judge, objection.
Grounds,
Hearsay?
sustained.
You met with Dr. Ward.
Correct.
What was the purpose of that meeting?
To debrief us on what to expect that morning.
What did you do next?
We went to the room where the autopsy was performed, put the sanitary booties on our shoes, signed in on a whiteboard with our name and cell phone numbers. So he had a record of everybody that was in the room. And at that point, we stood back against the wall and observed the autopsy.
Now, as a detective, you don't perform an autopsy, correct?
Correct.
But you were able to see it take place.
That's correct.
And what did you observe happening during that autopsy?
One of his team members brought out the body bag. And I recognized it to be the same body bag that we took from defendant Daybell's backyard that day because it still had dirt on it. It still had the same lock. And at that point, they opened the body bag and revealed the same black plastic and small body that appeared to be in the black plastic.
And then what did you observe?
Dr. Warren and his team cut down the middle of the black plastic to open up what was inside. At that time, I observed a small child with duct tape on his head from his chin to his forehead area, tightly wrapped around his head. He had red pajama pants on, red pajama shirt. He had his arms folded this way across his body. And there was duct tape from elbow all the way around to his other elbow. He had his ankles also bound with duct tape. He was still wearing his nighttime pull-up diaper. And he had black socks with the word Skechers in orange. I could tell that he was going through various states of decomposition based on his skin color.
Judge, I'm going to object.
Grounds.
He doesn't have the experience to make a determination about the levels of decomposition. He's speculating.
I'll sustain the objection and strike the final part of the answer about decomposition, Mr. Wood.
All right. Detective, what did the body's skin look like?
The skin was sloughing. It appeared to be bluish green, black, yellow. And through my training experience, going through and handling different dead bodies at different stages of decomposition, that's what I read.
Judge, I'm going to object again. There's been no foundation for him to make that sort of medical assessment. He's not a medical doctor.
Your Honor, my argument would be that's not a medical assessment. It is on his training experience.
I'll overrule the objection. If you'd like to cross further, you'll have a chance, Mr. Pryor. The objection is overruled. The foundation laid in the previous response.
Detective, once this, the body was taken out of the bag and you made the observations that you've just described, what happened next?
Dr. Warren and his team then cut the white plastic that was wrapped around his head and duct taped. They cut down the middle to reveal what was underneath. At that point, I observed another piece of duct tape stretched from JJ's jawline to jawline over his mouth. He also cut the several layers of duct tape from his arms, and it revealed some more duct tape that had his wrist bound underneath all those layers of duct tape. He then took his bottom pajamas off and shirt, and it also revealed the nighttime pull-up diaper he was still wearing.
Now, Detective, you spoke about the duct tape and bag over the head, correct?
Correct.
And you've been referring to this as JJ.
Yes.
Until that duct tape and bag were removed, though, were you able to identify him as JJ?
No. Once they removed the duct tape in the bag, through looking at all the photographs for the last 8 months of JJ, I recognized him to be the same little boy laying on that table as JJ Vallow. He had the same hairstyle, shorter on the sides, longer on top. At that point, I recognized him as JJ.
Once the clothing was removed, what did you observe happen next?
Dr. Warren pointed out some bruising on his arms, on his ankles, on his chest. He also pointed out some scratch marks on the left side of his neck, just under the duct tape. At that point, Dr. Warren and his team performed the autopsy.
Your Honor, I'd ask that the witness be shown State's Exhibits 12A through 12B.
A through B.
E.
B, thank you.
Detective, can you review those exhibits for me when you've had a chance to? Do you recognize State's Exhibits 12A through E?
Yes.
What do they purport to be?
JJ Vallow laying on the table after they opened the black plastic.
And were you present when those pictures were taken?
Yes.
You were in the same room?
Correct.
Are those true and accurate representations of what you observed that day?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'd ask that State's Exhibits 12A through E be entered into evidence.
No objection, Judge.
Very well. 12A through E are admitted. All of these are graphic in nature, will not be published or shown on the court's live feed or to the public in the courtroom. They'll be published to the jurors, however you wish to split.
Thank you. Detective, can you describe to the jury what you observed in State's Exhibit 12A?
Once they removed the black plastic that JJ Vallow was in, this is the first thing we saw. can see on the white plastic on top of his head, that's the slit that was made when his head was sticking out of the ground. You can see the duct tape I testified to wrapped around his entire face. His red pajamas are still soaked with body decomposition. The level of duct tape on his arms is what really caught my attention. And he still has a white and blue child blanket wrapped around him.
You describe for the jury what you observed in States Exhibit 12B.
Since the JJ's legs, his bottom half, he has his red pajama pants on still. His ankles, like I testified, are wrapped with duct tape. Those are his black Skechers socks that he had on. It's hard to see there too, but his legs and body are also soaked with decompositions.
You describe for the jury what you saw in States Exhibit 12C.
When I spoke earlier that Dr. Warren cut down the white plastic and the duct tape that was covering his head, this is what we saw. You can see the other layer of duct tape around his mouth that went from jawline to jawline. You can see his hair, brown hair still was matted down to his head, wet, soaked with body decomposition. But at that point, I was able to still recognize him as J.J. Vallow.
What did you observe in 12D?
That's the white bag that was covering his head. That looks like blood in the bag. It's actually body decomposition, just breaking down. It appeared to be a normal trash bag. It had a red drawstring. And you can see, if you look close at the waffle style pattern, the expandable type trash bag. There's still pieces of duct tape that are attached. That's what that photograph depicts.
You describe for the jury what you saw in 12B.
That's just another photo of JJ. The tape is starting to lose its stickiness because of the way the body is. It's just a different photo or a different angle of JJ's face.
So can I have a re-sidebar, counsel? A bit earlier than normal, but we are going to take a mid-morning recess at this time. We'll reconvene here about 20 before 10:30 to get started with additional testimony.
All rise, please.
Gentlemen, if you are not part of the court staff, please exit the courtroom.
Thank you. Please be seated. Counsel, if you're ready, we'll have the jurors brought back in.
All rise. Jury is present and accounted for.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Please be seated. We're back on the record then on case CR 22-21-1623, just concluded the morning recess. Detective Colonel CEO is still under oath, and Mr. Wood, if you'd like to continue with your direct, you can do that at this time.
Thank you. Detective, I think when we left off, we were speaking about the autopsy of J.J. Vallow, correct?
Correct.
You had mentioned earlier that you did observe the actual, not only the body, but then the autopsy of J.J. Vallow.
That's correct.
And were you present for that entire autopsy?
Yes, I was.
And when that autopsy was concluded, what did you do?
At that time, Dr. Warren and his team removed JJ from that autopsy table. Then they brought out a second, black body bag, and I recognized it to be the same body bag from the scene because it also had dirt. And they placed that body back on the table.
And what did you observe next?
Dr. Warren and his team opened the body bag, looked at the remains for what was left as far as remains inside. He stated there was nothing he could do at that time with an autopsy. So
Judge, I'm going to move to strike as hearsay.
Your own statement already came through.
And I'm going to move to strike.
So,
would you repeat the question?
What did you observe? What were you had just talked about the Tylee's remains being brought out. What did you observe?
Once the remains were brought out, Dr. Warren opened the bag and looked at the remains and stated there was nothing he could do at that point. So at that time, we left the autopsy room for the day.
And when you left, did you do anything in furtherance of your investigation that day?
No,
Did you return to the Ada County Coroner's office the next day?
we did. On June 12th, 2020, we went back to the Ada County Coroner's office. At that point, Lieutenant Ball took custody of some of the evidence and we transported it to the state lab in Meridian.
And were you with Lieutenant Ball when you did that?
I was, yes.
And once you took it to the state lab, what did you do?
Those items were checked into the state lab. And then that concluded what we did for that day.
Detective, you spoke earlier about some of the other agencies you've worked with in this investigation. And is it correct you worked with Fremont County?
Correct, yes.
And I believe you testified that your primary focus in this investigation was looking for Tylee and JJ. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate.
Was there an investigation in Fremont County at the same time that had connections to your investigation?
Yes, there was.
What was that investigation?
Fremont was investigating the death of Tammy Daybell, who was married to the defendant, Chad Daybell. Kind of the exact same time we were doing our investigation with missing children.
Right. And would you meet with Fremont County and discuss the cases together?
Yes, we would.
And would you aid each other in those investigations?
Yes,
Would you share information?
yes.
Detective, are you aware of any event involving Tammy Daybell on October 9th, 2019?
Yes, I am.
How did you become aware of that event?
Through the course of sharing information with the Fremont County Sheriff's Office, we were advised.
Judge, can we approach?
Yes.
You are listening to continuing coverage of the trial of Chad Daybell from True Crime Today and the Hidden Killers podcast. Let's go back to the courtroom.